Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is my pleasure today to introduce Colleen Stiles Shields, I should say, from Northwestern University. It's my pleasure to have her and her colleague Stephen here today to talk about the very, very fascinating work they're doing mobile behavioral interventions. She is associated with the Feinberg School of Medicine and also another Center for Behavioral Technologies that she will tell you about. Anyway, her work is very complementary to the work we've been doing in this area, and I'm super happy she's here. So take it away, Colleen.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Mary. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. So I, as well as being from the Feinberg School of Medicine, I'm also from the Center for Behavioral Intervention Technologies. And I come from this with a background in social work as well as clinical psychology. So aside from just being thrilled to be here in general, I'm really excited for hopefully good discussions that come afterwards, given the varied expertise in this room and beyond. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about a different way to improve behavioral intervention technologies, and that's through harnessing more human features of the apps. So to start off, I'm going to start off with the very obvious problem, and that is the pervasive nature of mental health problems. In a given year, 19% of the US population will meet criteria for a mental health disorder, which translates to roughly 58 million adults in need of mental health services a year. And to put this into perspective, 21 to 30 million per year, that's depression alone. It's a fair number of people. However, out of that roughly 58 million people, only 21% are receiving adequate care. Now, surprisingly, given the number of undergrads you find on a college campus that say that they're psych majors, the issue of pervasive mental health is further compounded by we simply don't have enough behavioral change professionals in the field to meet this need of 58 million people a year requiring treatment. We actually have currently about half of what we need, which is around 300,000. Further, there are access barriers beyond the number in our workforce. So, for example, time constraints. There's a lot of people who work full-time, have childcare, have a commute, so maybe they've got 30 minutes on their lunch break, and that's really all they can give. Lack of access or geography. Conveniently, there's a lot of therapists in Seattle. There are a lot of therapists in Chicago, but unfortunately, a lot of places in our country, there aren't a lot of therapists in some areas. Further cost. Not only the cost of going to therapy, because insurance doesn't cover a lot, but cost of maybe childcare or transportation, a lot of hidden costs. And transportation as well. So I actually see a family at the University of Chicago right now that takes about 2 buses across an hour and a half to 2 hours each way to come and see me each week. And Chicago does not have winters like Seattle, so not only are they waiting for 2 buses, but they're waiting for 2 buses in very bitter cold. I don't think I could actually overcome that barrier, and I'm impressed that they do. And finally, there are symptoms inherent in certain conditions that really are going to interfere with maintenance and initiation. So depression, for example, we expect people with depression to have low motivation, to have things that aren't really feeling that fun for them. So it's already kind of hard to get them out the door to get to these things. So taken together, changes in treatment delivery are necessary to reach more people and overcome these barriers. Cue the entrance of behavioral intervention technologies, which I will hereafter refer to as BITs. So BITs are applications that use technologies such as mobile phones, computers, tablets, and sensors to support behaviors that improve health, mental health, and overall well-being. Now, I say BITs rather than mHealth or eHealth because I'm really focusing on the technologies that are focused on behavioral change specifically and not broader technologies in health. So that's why I'm kind of just sectioning out BITs from the overall umbrella of mHealth and eHealth. And as the title may indicate, BITs are a major focus of my lab, the Center for Behavioral Intervention Technologies, or CBITS. Now today I'm going to be focusing on BITs delivered through smartphones. And I chose this focus for a few reasons. So smartphones are rapidly increasing in computing capacity while dropping in cost. They also overcome a variety of disparities. So for example, ethnic minorities are more likely than Caucasians to own a smartphone, to access the web via phone, or to download health apps in general. So for this reason and more, they're forecasted to be the dominant platform for communications and web access. So it's probably a good idea if we figure out how and why bits work on them. So what do we know so far? Well, good news and bad news. I'm someone who likes to get the bad news out of the way first, so let's jump in. While there are a lot of health apps, and many of them are geared towards mental health, they're really not getting downloaded. They're really skewed to a very small number. And further that, if they are downloaded, they're really not getting used. So in 2014, a group looked at a commercial diet app of roughly 200,000 apps, downloads, excuse me, and 86.4 were never used, 11% were tried a few times, and 2.6 used it 10 times or more. Now the 2.6, these were people who were already engaged in diet tracking. So really not the people who are having trouble, really the people that they're trying to target to help them track their diet. Additionally, if you think about treatments for depression, for instance, something that happens less than 10 times is probably not going to have a huge intervention punch, and especially isn't going to give you a lot to monitor. So that 2.6 of 10 times or more is a really, really big problem, because that means that people are not getting the dosage, they're not getting their treatment, they're likely not going to get better.
Do you know if these statistics are very different than just general apps?
What was the first part? Sorry.
Are these statistics different than statistics for just random apps in the store? So are people more or less using behavioral change apps? So again, if you'll take just 4,000, so random set of 40,000 apps, again, you'll see some kind of long tail distribution of usage.
Right.
Do you know if it's similar to what you see here? Is it better, worse? For just
I think that's a great question, and to be honest, I don't think I'm well informed enough in the literature of the overall usage of apps across the board. But what I can say is from the health app side, and specifically the mental health app side, that this study is pretty representative, that like the tail off is it's just terrible. So I wish I could speak to the broader community and how that looks across like entertainment apps. I'm going to do that after this talk, I'm sure, and check that out. So thank you. Okay, so this is the bad news. Good news? I get to work with a bunch of scary smart people who are part of a larger community of very, very smart people that are trying to figure multiple ways of getting to this problem, of how we can get people to use the apps more, get the treatment, get the dosage. So as a psychologist, I'm personally interested in addressing this problem in seeing how relationships may be able to help people use bits more. So the solution boils down to two main approaches. The first one is to harness human connection with helping professionals, or connected health, for instance. So whether that's a known person or an unknown person the user is being connected with. Secondly, we can harness the human connection that might be seen within the interactions with the app. So let's first discuss the role of human relationships with bits in apps. So in 2011, Moore and colleagues proposed the supportive accountability model to provide a framework to what the evidence was saying. And the evidence was saying that adherence to bits is benefited by human support. The human support provided by a helping professional, which I'll call a coach for right now, enhances adherence to prescribed behaviors in the bit through a few ways. So first, the coach must be seen as demonstrating behaviors consistent with bond, so liking, trust, respect, and must also be seen as someone that's benevolent and having the necessary expertise for their role. Further, the coach must complete very specific behaviors. So for instance, framing the relationship as one with reciprocity. So the patient can expect very specific benefits from the coach if they both do what they agreed to do. And what is agreed upon must be done so collaboratively, defining very clear goals and expectations from the start. And that these goals are clear to the point that the patient also really gets why they're happening and how they're related to what their overall treatment goal is. And finally, it's got to be clear that performance monitoring will occur. And it's not to wag a finger if someone really doesn't do what they're supposed to do. It's so that the coach can really help the user to use the bit to its full potential. So it's clear from the beginning that the coach is going to kind of see what the user puts into the bit. So taken together, the idea is if they're seen a certain way and they perform these certain actions, accountability will increase. Now, the supportive accountability model predicts that adherence is enhanced through these support variables provided by the coach. However, this relationship to adherence is believed to be mediated by the user's motivation. So if a user has really high motivation, they probably need less communication from their coach. But if low, they probably need a lot more. Now, the tricky thing is, conditions like depression, we expect that people are going to start with a low motivation and hopefully with symptom improvement get to a higher motivation. But if you have any experience with treating mental health disorders, you know that it's really not a linear relationship from this step to this step. It's a lot more of a tango going on of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So this mediation really needs to be monitored carefully based on where the motivation is so that that communication can adjust appropriately so that the overall adherence improves. Okay, so to understand this idea a little bit better, let's look at a couple of ways this has been put into place. So taking examples from treating depression, the most common treatment for depression is actually through antidepressant medication. As most people go to their physician for medication, primary care is therefore the de facto treatment site for the treatment of depression. But it has really bad outcomes. So only 20% are typically symptom-free after 8 months of treatment. And that's not really a good average. Now, the reason this happens is usually attributed to poor adherence from the patients. They're really not taking the medications the way they were prescribed to when they were prescribed to. Additionally, physicians really have this communication barrier where they do not follow up to optimize the dose and they're missing a lot of information from the patient. So a target for harnessing supportive accountability in the treatment of depression in primary care is the existing helping relationship between a patient and their physician. For this purpose, CBITS has developed Medlink, which is designed to increase adherence and accountability for people with depression, initiating a new antidepressant medication. It does this by bolstering the reciprocity in the existing relationship between the patient and the physician. And since it's an already existing relationship, we start with the assumption that the bond and some trust in the expertise is already there, but will be really bolstered by the increase in communication and transparency between the two. Now, the Medlink system does a lot of really cool things, but I'm going to be keeping it kind of a higher level to what supports the supportive accountability model. So on the patient end, they're provided a Medlink app and a cellularly enabled pill box, which detects if their daily dose of medication has been taken and when. Now, the data from the pill box, as well as data from weekly assessments that are conducted through the app, provides information to the patient about if and when it might be recommended they reach out to their provider. Additionally, it's made very clear to them what data their provider will be getting from this entire system. And that's something in usability testing that patients were really responsive to, because they noted a lot of failure points in the relationship. So when they get into the office, they kind of don't really remember what the major problems were with their meds when they were at home. Or they give really inaccurate data. Or just the experience that a lot of us have had, you go into your primary care doctor's office and it's very clear they have a very short amount of time to be with you. And that's kind of hard to overcome sometimes, that feeling of, no, please sit and wait and listen to all of my problems. So they were really excited that their physicians would get this data and know it was accurate without them really having to do that themselves. Now on the physician side, the data is collected and combined into this physician information form, which you see here. And it includes depression scores over time, side effects information, as well as adherence. Now, Mary?
So when do they take the PHQ-9? Do they do that every day?
Every week.
Every week.
Mm-hmm. Every week. And we adjusted the PHQ to the 1 week time frame as well. So it's also not collecting 2 weeks of information every week. So the depression scores over time, the side effects, the adherence, these are all decision points that would really help the physician to figure out what contact they want to have with their patient, if they want to change dose, if they need to provide some psychoeducation about common side effects, for instance, and how long they might expect that to be. This is really helpful information, but usually is something the physician just doesn't have, especially if the patient isn't calling to schedule an appointment in the first place. So with the information that both parties have, the expectation about each role becomes much more explicit. There's a lot more communication and there's a lot more follow-up of what each side is doing.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
So if they're taking the PHQ-9 every week and then I see mild side effects, so they must be taking a much longer questionnaire every week.
Good question. So the weekly questionnaire includes the PHQ-9 and then they get the PRIZE and if necessary the FIBSR as well. So we get overall information about what domains of side effects are having and then what impact it's having as well. So we can track that change as well, because it's expected that in the first 4 weeks, you're going to get some side effects going.
But is there any issue with them taking such a long questionnaire, or are they okay with it?
Thus far, it's been okay. We've tried to streamline it as much as possible, and that's why, and forgive me, I want to say that the FIBSR is the optional one based on how they answer the prize. So if the side effects aren't too impairing, they're just taking 2 rather short ones. And we've built into the assessment model that based on how they answer, they get specific didactic content afterwards. So we kind of tried to note that as a benefit to the patient, that like the information that you're giving is not only going to go to your physician, but like you're also going to get some real-time feedback about it. So far so good that people are answering it. We also are benefited from the fact that in a research lab we have research assistants that are also following up pretty carefully. So this isn't real world yet. We'd like it to be, but still too early.
That was really my question.
The beauty of research assistants, they'll follow up and make sure things are answered. So applying this model to this problem sounds pretty good, right? I'm painting a nice picture. Well, what does the data tell us so far? So in an ongoing field trial of Medlink, all patients were taking their meds through the first 4 weeks, which is one of our assessment time points. The average adherence was 84%, with 5 taking it every day, 2 missing about once a week, and 1 person missing more than once a week. Now, the exciting thing about that 1 person is because of the data we were getting through the app, we know that they were not totally being adherent, more so because of their side effects. And the reason that's exciting is because if that's something that's communicated to their physician, that's a really adjustable problem, whether through psychoeducation or just playing with the meds a little bit. So 84%. In school, that'd be a B, right? Like, how's that sound? Well, compared to what usually is happening at primary care, within the first 4 weeks, only about 40% are still taking their meds. So yes, this is the field trial. Yes, it's 8 people, but we're pretty excited about that B so far. Additionally, the depression severity is improving, likely because they're getting the treatment and follow-up that's really recommended for their depression. And a further reflection of this is that the communication and follow-up between the patients and physicians is so much higher than is typically seen in the first 4 weeks. So 7 of our 8 patients had some type of physician follow-up. So 6 office visits, 4 phone calls, and 2 messagings through the EMR system. And again, this level of communication is really unheard of in primary care between the physician and patient. So we're pretty excited. Now, again, we'll learn a lot more when the randomized control trial starts, which is pretty soon, but this is exciting initial field data that the supportive accountability model of connecting a patient with a known provider, it seems to be helping usage and adherence, which therefore helps overall treatment goals. But what about harnessing supportive accountability without having a known person to hook them up with, which is usually what we're dealing with? Well, to examine that, we'll consider the other way of treating depression, which is therapy. So the therapy with the greatest evidence base in the treatment of depression is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And as the name suggests, CBT targets depression through interventions related to changing cognitions and behavior to ultimately impact mood. Now, BITS therefore take intervention principles from CBT and attempt to make changes in thoughts and behaviors over time. However, if this is happening face-to-face, a person would be paired with a therapist, and that would be the known provider. But the BIT is sort of taking the role of the therapist. So what human support can we therefore harness? Well, that's where the term coach comes back in. And that's where we're harnessing support with an unknown person that's new to the BIT user. So coaching for BITs has become common due to improved adherence associated with coach involvement, which really started to be noticed in web-based BITs. So the coach and user, they meet over the phone. There's no face-to-face interaction whatsoever. And then have weekly 5 to 15 minute phone calls that can be replaced by messaging after a certain point, or messaging concur with the phone calls as well. Now, the coach's role is to use the supportive accountability model to increase adherence and help the user to use the BIT in the best way possible for them to get the treatment. So as coaches are not actually therapists, this also increases generalizability in practice, because it really increases the number of people who might be able to fill this role, which is one of the barriers we're trying to target. We just don't have enough behavioral change specialists. So it's exciting that it overcomes this barrier and has positive outcomes. The other thing we're starting to notice in the data is that having this expectation that there's going to be this phone call or this message once a week really helps establishing some usage patterns. Similar to how you might, scrounge and do your homework right before a class, people are really logging in to the bit to use it immediately before or after their coaching call. And what we've noticed is the most successful users are the ones that get sort of into this pattern, people who maybe even do like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday pattern. And the coaching contact is really increasing that accountability to kind of get them into a pattern, even if it's just around that coaching call.
How are the coaches trained?
Well, so right now, they're technically right now the coaches that we are using are therapists, but we are working to increase this model that it could just be BA level people that are very trained in the bit. So they have that expertise, which is part of the model, but don't necessarily do CBT. It's really the bit that's going to do the CBT.
How does the typical phone call message start?
Great question. So the first call is usually a little bit longer. It's a little bit more of a walkthrough and getting some history gathering. But otherwise, kind of going back, to the model, the calls usually start off by the coach acknowledging like what they notice in terms of the usage. Say you used like a thought tracker, the coach might make a comment of like, oh, I really saw that the thought tracker was used really well this week and like you were really using those principles, or hey, you were using the thought tracker and I'm a little confused about some of the data you were putting in and I want to make sure that this is really a helpful tool for you. So following the model, it starts off with really the expertise and the accountability and kind of showing what each side has done and what work they've done towards their goals. But then there's a little bit of the bond as well. How are you doing? How are things going? And then unless there's any explicit questions, then it's kind of the goal setting for the next week. Because it's really trying to teach them certain skills from CBT. So what skills are they really going to practice and put into use with the bit in their life this week?
I'm trying to think what would the difference like if without this app, but having the therapist calling in the same frequency, will that achieve the same result? Or does the app, which actually finds the real usage, really matter? Because if you just call in to ask him, hey, have you taken the pill? Mm-hmm. He probably won't tell you a lie, right?
I mean, I think that it's interesting, and that's a lot of the questions, like going back to our Medlink app, there's a lot of information they want relayed in a certain way, but they said that it's easier sometimes to tell an app than a human calling and checking in. So yeah, it's a different.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. Did I get to your question? Okay. Okay, moving back. Okay. So another thing that we've noticed is that when we create bits without coaching, there seems to be a request for it in the user feedback we receive, particularly around the guidance in using the bit effectively. So we've gotten responses like, I'd really like more leading to help walk you through the features, really know when I should be using it, or I'd like more discussion questions or encouragement of how to use, and I could really use more instruction. So people kind of want that extra human support to help them use the tool the way it was designed to and give them that encouragement and support. Additionally, when coaching is provided, bond is usually very often noted, as well as improved confidence in using the bit to its full potential. So we get things like, it's really nice to talk to the coaches, having that interaction is helpful. I was able to read through the notes from the coaching call to figure out feature functions later on my own. And this is really the key too. We want people to feel empowered to have the information that, I know how to use this right and I can do this on my own in real life.
The coach is really there to walk them through the usability of the app.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to coach them.
Right, it's to coach them to use the app, yeah.
It's way different than what I was thinking.
So as much of our coaching data so far has been related to web-based interventions, I also wanted to provide a snapshot of what we've seen so far in our coached apps. So we have an app called Mobilize, which we did an 8-week pilot for in the last year with a sample of 8. And Mobilize has didactic content through text, video, and audio, interactive tools, notifications, and feedback. And through the 8-week trial, we had 6 participants complete all 8 weeks. And again, 6 out of 8, you kind of go, I don't know. But I keep thinking back to that 2.6% that used the health app more than 10 times. So this is a different ratio than we were expecting based on what the data was already giving us. And further, it goes back to if the supportive accountability model is really bolstering the use, then people are actually getting a higher dosage of treatment, and that seems to be impacting their depression. So we had significant scores in every measure of depression we had at the pre and post. Again, it's only 8 people. We're going to do much larger trials, but so far, so good. So the takeaway here appears to be that human support has some real benefits. Bolstering bits with human support with a known person, like a primary care physician, or an unknown person, like a coach, harnesses supportive accountability through bond and legitimacy to increase explicit accountability on both parts. This seems to increase use and adherence, which means participants are getting a higher dosage of treatment, which appears to be benefiting their depression, which is really our goal in giving out these bits. Again, I'm going to say the stars of my presentation are actual CBITS people, so that's why maybe it's not quite a great quality picture, but wanted to mention that on this slide. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit. So the second way of improving adherence and use of bits delivered through apps is through designing them in very specific social ways. So before I get to explaining what that means, let me back up and briefly explain what led to this idea and why we think it's important. So we're actually going to back up to me being a wide-eyed 22-year-old, fresh out of undergrad and starting my first clinical internship. And the first time I sat down with a client and really felt this strong mutual connection, internally I was like, wow, this is a really cool feeling and I need to find out how to make this happen more. Well, that really cool feeling is a lot better known as Therapeutic Alliance. Therapeutic Alliance was defined by Borden in the 70s as the relational bond formed between a therapist and client through collaborative work, mutual trust, and establishing and reaching treatment goals. Now, usually this construct is broken down into their goal agreement, task agreement, and bond. Now, these probably sound like familiar constructs based on the supportive accountability model we were just talking about, and that's actually not a coincidence. Because beyond feeling cool, Therapeutic Alliance is really an important factor in mental health treatment. So, for example, in CBT, which we discussed a few minutes ago, which has the strongest evidence base for the treatment of depression, Therapeutic Alliance is given this title of a critical non-specific factor. So what that means is the level of Therapeutic Alliance that is found between the therapist and client when they're doing therapy is an important predictor of how well the therapy does, regardless of really what is said in the room. So Therapeutic Alliance is not, if you picked up a CBT book, they mention that it's great because it's this important critical non-specific factor, but it's not one of the specific change tactics of CBT. It's not targeting the cognitions, it's not targeting the behavior. It's simply the feeling between the person and their therapist. And again, it's kind of broken down to, are we really agreeing on my overall goals for treatment? Are we really agreeing on the tasks that are going to get us there? And do I really feel like I like this person and this person respects me? That's really, I mean, strangely, it took us a really long time to figure this out. Borden discovered this in the 70s, and as you know, Freud's been around a lot longer. So we kind of came to realize that sometimes how the person feels about the therapist is actually much more important than what the therapist is saying. So, okay, Therapeutic Alliance is a big deal. So more exciting, because I'm someone who's interested in both telehealth and bit work, recent findings also indicate that Therapeutic Alliance can be effectively established without visual cues. So in fact, when we compared Therapeutic Alliance ratings for 162 people who were randomized to face-to-face CBT to 163 people who were randomized to telephone CBT, never laid eyes on their therapist, never saw a picture of their therapist. Well, we found that there were no significant differences in ratings of Therapeutic Alliance from both the therapist and client perspective of both treatments, and that these similar ratings were consistent across treatment duration. Now, the even more exciting thing is that without those visual cues, the people who were in the telephone-administered CBT, their level of Therapeutic Alliance was just as important as predicting how well they would do in their treatment as it was for the face-to-face folks. So I get like, this is the stuff that I geek out about because I get really excited about the human connection and the fact that you can take someone, I could call someone in Utah, for instance, and never lay eyes on them, never see a picture of them, and they could feel just as connected and feel like we're just on task with the goals and tasks as I would with someone who is down the street from me in Chicago and coming into an office. So, really exciting. At the same time that we were finding these outcomes in telehealth, I was also conducting usability testing for a Medlink app. Now, despite me sitting down next to each participant that came in and really asking, how well the app is working and how well it's meeting their needs based on how we designed it, their word choices were really interesting. So I got a lot of, oh look, it totally knew what I was thinking. Or I feel like this just knows me and what I didn't get or remember from my doctor. They really never said anything about the designers or CBITs or even me. I didn't design it, but I was the human there representing that. It was a lot more about the app's choices and behaviors, which kind of struck me. So I started feeling more like I was getting information about a being rather than an app. And that led me to two questions. First, do people have sort of a social response to technology? And if so, is there a way that we can harness that and build a relationship that's similar to Therapeutic Alliance to increase the use and outcomes? Well, those questions led me straight to those two men, Byron Reeves and Clifford Nass, who in 1996 literally wrote the book on the many studies their group had conducted regarding a phenomenon referred to as the computers as social actors, or Casa Paradigm. Now, I imagine a lot of you are probably familiar with this work. I, however, was brand new to it, so bear with me as I walk you through my thought process a little bit. Casa holds that people treat computing technology as social actors and conform to the same social behaviors they would with other people, even though they would think it unreasonable to be polite, for example, to a piece of machinery. So, to give an example of this, can I ask for 2 brave volunteers for a very quick poll? Those 2 hands went up first. Who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll go first.
How am I doing with the presentation so far?
You're doing fine.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
How am I doing?
Great.
Great, cool, thank you. All right, glad to hear it. That's the kind of feedback I enjoy getting. However, it's likely that there was some social influence going on here. One, it made me feel good, which I appreciate, but also made it less likely that I would burst into tears in front of everyone, which makes everyone in the room a lot more comfortable. But it's likely that had I left the room and someone else had walked in and said, how is Colleen doing, that we'd see a little bit more variance in the responses. A little bit more like, yeah, okay, or she talks kind of fast, she's got a Midwest accent. Instead of the great feedback I just got, thank you. And it's not that you were lying, it's more you're being polite, which is something that we're really culturally normed to do. And in fact, social psych has found this, that when a human asks a person about herself, I'll go back to the user, will give more positive responses than when a different human asks the same questions. And because people are less honest when a human asks about herself, the answers will be more homogeneous than when a different human asks the same questions. Well, it turns out that this applies to computers. So to evaluate this, people with computer experience were brought into a lab and told that they'd be given a tutorial on a computer, and then after the tutorial receive some type of an evaluative test. And then because the program was being in development, they would then evaluate how the computer did in the tutorial. So people were brought in, they sat down at computer 1. And computer 1 gave them 20 facts, such as, according to a Harris poll, 30% of all American teenagers kiss on the first date. Scandalous, I know. And then people were asked to rate on a Likert scale how much information they felt they knew about that fact. And based on that, they were led to believe that the computer would give them special facts after that, but really it gave everyone the same info in the same order afterwards. People then completed the test of how well they understood the facts. And then computer one told the person how they did based on how they answered the test. And then computer one said, by the way, I think I did a great job. Please evaluate me. So half the sample stayed on computer one and evaluated it, and half the sample walked 3 feet over and rated on an identical computer we'll call computer two. So those that stayed on computer one rated it as significantly more friendly, significantly more competent, and the answers had significantly less variance. Now, every single subject was debriefed afterwards and asked, would you ever change your answers to make a computer feel better? Very confidently, everyone said, no, that's silly. I would definitely not do that. So the Casa researchers put this out into the world, got a lot of feedback, a lot of concern about confounders. So very briefly, I'll go through a couple. I could talk up here all day about it. So they replicated the study and had, instead of people going to computer two, the half the sample, the other half the sample went down the hall and answered paper and pencil questionnaires. Same thing. They then replicated this again, and instead of computer one delivering all this information via text, it had a specific voice. And part of the sample stayed at computer one and rated that voice and how well it did. Part switched over to computer two, which had a different voice to give the ratings, and another part again did the paper and pencil. Same thing. Via text or audio, people were changing their answers to be a little bit nicer to the computer. So this research, and many, many other studies conducted by Casa researchers, has been conducted using a methodology that simply takes social psychology findings, looks for the word human or person, and replaces it with whatever computing technology they want to test out. So for example, what we just went through would be when a computer asks a user about itself, the user will give more positive responses than when a different computer asks the same questions. And because people are less honest when a computer asks about itself, the answers will be more homogeneous than when a different computer asks the same questions. This methodology has been effective, even though participants frequently describe, like the polite to computer group, that they really think it's weird to follow social norms with pieces of technology. Now, this group explains this mismatch is basically an evolutionary problem. Technology's gone so much faster than our brains that our default is to be social. It's sort of like when you watch a scary movie. You get really freaked out, but you're not in danger, and neither are the actors, except for, some career choices, but that's what they link it to. Now, Casa isn't the only social attribution to computing technology theory, but it is the most cited for this phenomenon. You may also have heard of it as the media equation or other things listed at the bottom of the screen. Casa has been demonstrating using the methodology we just discussed in over 100 studies with computers, and this work has expanded to many other types of computing technology and characteristics of it, such as voices. Now, it is of note that this phenomenon seems particular to computing technology. So, for instance, we don't really have social interactions with our dishwasher, and we don't really hold other pieces of technology responsible, for instance, for anger-inducing situations. You don't really get mad at your car when you're in traffic, but you do get mad at your computer when you get an email you really don't want. So there's something about the computing factor that brings out this social nature that technology in general doesn't. Yes?
Do you happen to know if someone studies if there are differences between different age groups? So I might imagine that we are old enough such that we grew up without computers and develop our social skills without computers, and then maybe kind of use computer in the same way we use humans, whereas my son is used to communicate with his device and might have different interactions. Is this something that has been studied?
Yes, and I'm actually about to get to that. So if I don't fully address that, please bring it back up again. Okay, so perfect timing. Casa demonstrates that people make the social attributions, but beyond the evolutionary explanation, they don't really have the data to explain, more of why this happens and under what circumstances it could be promoted, which is what I'm interested in with this whole Therapeutic Alliance idea. So another theory that developed out of moderators of Casa that started to be identified, such as computer experience, is the Computing Technology Continuum of Perspective, or CTCP. Now, CTCP conceptualizes a continuum in regards to how technology is viewed. And the continuum is anchored by a locally simplex perspective that views technology as a machine that's programmed, controllable, and alterable by humans. And the other end is a globally complex perspective, which views technology as an autonomous entity that's capable of exerting some type of control or influence on a person's life. Now, their hypothesis and research findings really indicate that most people are somewhere in the middle of that. However, the CTCP and Casa literature provide us a lot of insight into characteristics of both the technology and user that can really start to shift where someone is on that spectrum, which is something I really want to do. So again, I was really excited to find this. So very quickly, because again, this might be old hat to a lot of people in this room, some tech characteristics they've noticed. So improvement on tasks and improvement in social attributions, things like distance. So people remember things a lot better if something on the screen is a lot closer. So an agent happens to be suddenly this close on the screen. Now, fine line, because much like in real life, if someone got really close into your face to explain something, it also could creep you out. So a lot of these have a lot of fine line instances. Additionally, flattery and praise from a computer, even if unwarranted, really increase the feelings of likability and socialness towards it. Politeness goes a long way. Additionally, expertise. If a computing technology that's going to do some type of didactic or tutorial at the beginning establishes its expertise, people will remember that task better, and they will do better out in the future and perform it more quickly than if it's believed the technology is more of a generalist. Additionally, putting people on teams, that seems, and having that camaraderie with the technology really bolsters that feeling of like, I'm having this social interaction with this thing and we're all in it together. There are a lot of things they've also found might interfere with it. So people do not like being criticized in general, but this goes with computing technology as well, specifically if it's unwarranted. They really lose their credibility if you get criticized and you really shouldn't have been. Additionally, boastfulness goes really badly in forming that social cue. So, which is an interesting finding, because if you want to really establish that the computer is an expert, it needs to not be braggy about it. And there's a lot of things that depend. So gender of voice really changes how people attribute different social characteristics and how they might perform. Different voices really aren't looped together. Different personalities are prescribed to them. And even the presence, so Clippy in Microsoft Word, they've been found that if Clippy's in the corner really not doing anything and we assume the user really isn't noticing them, women actually have some social inhibition when they're performing tasks, when they're being observed by that agent. So that's good to know, depending on what type of thing you're going to be building. So some user characteristics have come out. Women have been found across the board to be more social towards computing technology and make more attributions. Additionally, higher levels of education also seems to be impacting that you move more towards the simplex end of the model. And context of use. So for example, I'm in Seattle and I have no sense of direction and I've never been here before. In a context like that, I might actually attribute a lot more intelligence to my app because it knows where I am and I don't. However, I might not see it as intelligent when I'm at home and I know exactly where I am. And then there's a lot of psychosocial things, which as a psychologist I'm really interested in because these are factors that we're hoping to change and have the bit respond to as people change. So people with social anxiety and depression are incredibly comorbid, so it's important to know this. So social anxiety, those people are more likely to be much more honest to computing technologies and also have more social attributions to them. So they're really building that relationship and telling them more things than they would to a human. People who are more neurotic, people who really view their locus of control as external and outside of them, which again is very common for depression, or have lower self-esteem or lower self-efficacy, really plays up how much social attributions they're making. So again, I'm very excited to stumble upon this literature because a lot of it turned out to be very applicable to mental health and what we're trying to design for bits. So aside from being very exciting and telling us a lot, how can we actually apply these findings to bits to increase the attributions and possibly the relational factors to bits and users over time? Well, we can start from what we already know in terms of developing bits. So given that current psychological theoretical models that are efficacious in face-to-face treatments really haven't been sufficient to inform the design and development of bits, Moore and Schuler and colleagues proposed the bit model to provide a framework for this need. So I'm going to present a very high-level overview of this, but highly recommend the paper in JMIR or speaking to Dr. Schuler afterwards if you have more questions about it. But in developing a bit, this model breaks down the theoretical aspects and instantiation through the 4 W's and hows one needs to figure out to design a bit. So the theoretical includes the why. So really, why do you want to make this bit? What are your clinical aims? To get people to get out and do things, to improve their depression? Like, really, what are you trying to do, and how much do they need to engage with it to get that clinical aim? And the conceptual how. So what change strategies are you going to decide? So for CBT, a lot of times people do kind of go the route of either the cognitive change or the behavioral change. Like, what tactics are going to use to get to the why that you want? Now, what I'm actually much more interested in is the instantiation side. Now, if we're thinking about social attributions, why the instantiation and not the theoretical? Well, that goes back to that whole critical non-specific factor thing in Therapeutic Alliance. So we know that Therapeutic Alliance impacts how well someone does without actually being the specific change tactics. It's really more of the intangible feel that's established. And that's why I'm much more interested in the instantiation side and kind of what's being expressed there to the user. So in the instantiation side, questions we want to consider like what? So the what is what elements are you going to engage with your user? So like, are you going to have messaging? What type of information delivery mechanisms are you going to use? Will there be logging? Those types of things. As well as a technical how, which really gets to the characteristics of the bit. So what mediums for delivery are you choosing, like text versus audio versus video? And then finally the when, which includes the workflow, which if you think about a bit that's going to have to be around for a while, people are going to have to interact with it for a while to really enact that change, then the workflow is really important of what they're getting when. So the social attributions literature provides bit developers with design implications for the instantiation of bits. So for example, to answer the what of a bit I might want to develop, developers might consider some of the following from the Casa and TCP literature. So if things are liked more when they give praise, even if it's unwarranted, I might design a bit that has a lot of positive reinforcement and praise through notifications or banners on home screens. Or if there's inhibition on tasks when females are observed by agents, then I really want to make sure that agents do not feel present when they're going to be conducting certain tasks or learning new tasks. If there's a positive bias, if they're evaluated on the same platform, I'm really going to want to launch assessments and evaluations in a different app or platform, especially for mental health where we're really tracking how those assessments are changing over time. We want to make sure it's as accurate as possible. If it's great that they demonstrate intelligence, then my feedback, reports, or visualization, I'm probably going to get from some passive data collection or do some analytics to provide information that aren't directly resulting from user input. So the bit kind of knows some stuff without being told. For the how, so male and masculine voices are perceived as friendlier and more influential. I might therefore decide that my introduction information will be delivered via a masculine voice audio. If experts are believed and liked more and more information is retained, I'm really going to make sure that the user knows the expertise of my bit. But if it's liked less when it praises itself, then I don't want it to be boastful about this. And if it's liked most when bit personality adapts to the user's personality, then I'm going to do some tailored information delivery and some messaging styles to match the user personality. And for the when, again, if we're going to do the intelligence, then I'm probably going to come up with some really interesting algorithms, like when a certain behavior is noticed, a certain element is launched. Or making sure that it's an event-based progression rule, because that seems more targeted and planned than an open format. If it's important that they demonstrate emotions and caring, then maybe I'm going to set something that's going to launch a notification when noticing or noting concern or caring when it notices something that's different about the pattern. Or if it's liked more when it demonstrates that it's acting out of plan, then there's going to be really clearly defined frequency of deployment and progression. So the user really feels like the bit has a plan of where they're going. That's kind of getting into the goal and task agreement aspect of it. Like, we've got a plan, we're in this together, and this is how we're getting there. Now, these design considerations work through the lens of the bit model and the social attributions literature informs the ultimate design of the bit. Okay, so we've got that. But what we need is a framework for understanding and conceptualizing this research so we can generate hypotheses and evaluate them. Further, our understanding of social attributions and the impact on bits doesn't stop at the creation of the bit. So to better understand the effect through usage, we've developed the social attributions to bits model. Now, we've already covered the design piece. Oh, I haven't used this once. The design piece in purple. But beyond that, we know that bit developers will have considered their intended users when making decisions. However, we rarely actually get to pick out who uses our bits. They usually don't fit in that well-defined box that we make for them of what we expect. So therefore, the variability of intensity of expected user characteristics for those who use the bit will inform the ultimate level. So this is the information we went through that's informed by the literature, which goes into the ultimate design of the bit. But then really what the users, the actual users versus the intended users bring to the table, these two together will create the social attributions to our bit initially. Now, it's expected that much like a therapeutic relationship, these levels will change over time. And particularly considering that we want the user to have improved symptoms, that's a change that we hope will happen. But we also expect that the bit itself will change based on the responses and machine learning that we incorporate within it. So the first half of the model is really the initial, and then we expect there to be some change, much like there is in therapy, that reinforces that. And ultimately, that leads to changes in usage and outcome, which, again, is the ultimate goal. If people use this more and get the dosages they need, hopefully they start feeling better.
Or use it less.
Right, which is also, we've definitely also seen that when people are doing pretty well, there is less use.
Which is problematic for your research.
It is problematic for our research, but if that's something that we find, like in therapy, when someone starts doing better, you go to biweekly sessions, and then you go to monthly sessions. And then it's kind of like, okay, you're good, you got the stuff. So if the bit is developed in a way that they have that social relationship with it, where they feel like it is there, and they've got that safety net that they can go back to, then maybe that lowering in usage over time is actually really reflective of what we want and expect from face-to-face treatment.
We kind of think you need it in cyclical waves.
So
get out of their face as they get better, and then remind them.
We're still
down the
here.
road,
Yeah.
Don't worry, we will always have new users, and this 19% is over years.
Wow. Cool.
But if you're measuring success of your app,
Right.
more or less usage isn't necessarily the metric
Right.
that's saying whether it's useful or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we want to see that the depression scores went down. That's the metric we want.
Behavior.
Exactly. And so far, what we've seen with the really short-term bits, where it is 4 to 8 weeks, where, ideally we'd like someone to hold on for 4 to 8 weeks, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. In those short times, it really is, there seems to be a little bit of a dosage effect, because at the beginning is really when you're going to get the big punch. So how long this arrow goes in time is yet to be defined. Okay, so the takeaway from the second step of harnessing the human side of apps is that we know that people make social attributions to computing technology. The literature's there to show us this. But we can take this information and use it to inform our design decisions to work towards improving use and adherence for apps for better outcomes. Now, in the future, we'd like to continue to explore and refine both models. So both the supportive accountability model and harnessing the social attributions to bits. Now, a few field trials are underway or have recently wrapped up, some of which we've seen today. And some larger RCTs are coming where we're hoping, again, to really focus on some of this. But one specific future project we have is hoping to incorporate both of those. So I got an F31, which is a research training grant from the National Institute of Health. And that was to complete a project that the first part is a usability phase and the second part is a small pilot trial. So I will be taking elements of apps that are designed more for behavioral activations, the B part of CBT, and cognitive therapy, the C part of CBT, which we really don't have much data on how those work up against each other in an app, which is very interesting because they're really the go-tos for treating depression. So in usability testing, I'm hoping to kind of Frankenstein the most usable app that we could make for both of those. And those designs will ultimately inform the apps that will be tested in a small pilot trial. So we'll see how the BA and CT apps go against each other and against a control group. Now, coaching will be involved in the trial, so that will further help refine and understand the supportive accountability model. But we're also hoping to track the social attribution levels throughout treatment and start really testing this theory out and seeing how it works. Okay, I'm getting towards the end of time, and happily I'm at my thank you page where not all of my names are popping up, which is a fun thing that happens when you're in front of a lot of people on camera. But ultimately, I'd like to very quickly thank CBITS and the many, many people that contributed to this work, as well as acknowledge some funding from the National Institute of Mental Health. And most importantly, thank you all for being here and taking time out of your day to be a part of this talk. I didn't have any questions pop up here, so I'm excited to see a hand.
Have you also done any sort of deeper research or study into game design, specifically, even for mobile apps, they have a sticky factor to it. People come back and back. And have you done any sort of looking into why certain things are sticky and how that might be applied to this area?
I haven't too much, so I'm really excited you brought that up. I would like to look into the stickiness a bit more. Yeah.
Well, I think game design is just, that's a whole field unto itself, but they really are very sort of thoughtful about how they're engaging their users and giving them rewards along the way, to keep them going. So
yeah, definitely. Very cool. Thank you. Any other questions?
All right, let's thank Colleen again.
Thank you.